Welcome to Voice It, a podcast showcasing people in the Clare Valley and the mid-north of South Australia who've started their own businesses from scratch and have turned them into success stories. This is a chance for them to tell you their story. I'm your host, Annabelle Homer.
Again, in industry and in all these things in life, you've got to work hard, you've got to make your own luck, and everyone says that's important, but you also have to be lucky. As 100% about that. And a lot of these things, it's not when you sell, it's when you buy and what you choose to do.
Today, you will hear the absolute success story of George Millington. For those that know George, yes, he is the man behind Collinsville Stud Merinos, one of the most prominent and well-respected sheep studs in Australia, based in the mid-north of SA. But there is so much more about George you may not know. His successful business career began way before stud sheep. In fact, it all began in coffee. It was coffee, confidence, excellent business sense and luck that catapulted his career and transformed him into a millionaire by his early 30s. George brought Monjava coffee to life, then on-sold it to San Remo. Then invested in logistics, setting him up to buy and create a rural livestock empire across the mid-north of South Australia. Kapiti, Collinsville Station, East Bungaree and Kadlunga. This is an amazing story of business success, which you will hear over 2 episodes. You'll hear how George ticks, his thought process and how he approaches making decisions in business. But before we talk about Collinsville and coffee, we go back to the beginning, to his life in Adelaide, because as with all stories, it's good to get an understanding of how it all began, where George came from, what he started with, what grounding did he have to give him the confidence and the wisdom to kickstart a successful career spanning 3 industries. This interview took place on the 15th of November 2023. Enjoy this first part of the journey with George Millington.
My father, being from Tasmania, came over here and he was involved in the building industry and he was working for Hanson & Yuncken. And my mother was a stay-at-home mum, but she actually went to university and was an accountant, qualified CPA, and ended up working in the family business down at Port Adelaide. Again, long story. We as a family have actually sold out of that family business about 17 years ago, which I think was the best decision we ever made. But she worked down there and that business was called Le Mesurier Timber Company.
What was it called?
Le Mesurier Timber Company. So it was an import. It was one of South Australia's oldest companies, and it was originally came about because my great ancestors, if you like, on my mother's side were shipping people, and they were bringing in people and they were originated from Guernsey, which is an island in between England and France, and they were in the transportation business, and they were bringing people out from England as free settlers to South Australia, obviously not convicts like everywhere else in the west and the east. And they worked out pretty soon after arriving in South Australia and bringing people back and forth that was a real shortage of timber in South Australia, in the fact that people wanted to come out here, build homes, but there were no trees, unlike they were on the eastern states and in the west. So they went, and they basically started up a business by bringing in timber from Europe and North America and actually importing it into South Australia. And that then progressed on to a slightly larger business. It was quite a successful business. Ended up being a part owner in softwoods and actually the pine plantations down the southeast. And then in the late 80s, my mother's family business sold out of that. And that was with a whole deal with CSR. And then we sold out of, and then we kept...
When you say the whole deal with CSR?
So CSR actually came along and wanted to buy Softwood Holdings, which involved a lot of the plantations down the southeast, but we were actually getting the supply from. And then we still kept the wholesale distribution business. Well, again, we can get into that, but that didn't have a lot of margin and didn't actually work. There wasn't a lot of money to be made there because you were basically then just buying it from someone else and selling it to someone else, and there was no competitive advantage in what you did. So we as a family, or my mother's side of the family, where me and my 8 cousins, of which I sort of led the transaction, got out about sort of 17 years ago and sold to the rest of the family. And since then, the whole company's been sold to someone from New South Wales.
So let's talk a bit about you and your business background. You went to uni. You went to school. Where did you go to school?
Yeah, I went to school. I've had a very lucky, very fortunate life. So I went to school at St Peter's College in Adelaide as a day boy, not a boarder. Now I live up here. And I'm almost ashamed to admit I went there from year 1 to year 12. So I went there for 12 years. And so I've never actually been to school with a girl. I've only ever been to school with boys. So maybe that's affected me. So when I went there in year 1, there was one class and there were 14 students. Now I think there's 4 year 1 classes and there's 20 students in each. So it's become a far bigger thing. Went there for 12 years, finished there, went straight to Adelaide University, did an economics degree, finance major, management major, finished there, went straight next door to the University of South Australia to do an accountancy degree, sort of doubling up on some of the subjects. It's something else I wanted to do. I was doing that for a year and a half. I remember sitting there in a subject called Auditing Theory and Practice 3, which is one of the final subjects you actually do. And I just went, I am not going to work as a chartered accountant. I'm not going to work as a CPA. Why am I doing this? I have far more interest in doing other things. So I sat there and probably one of my biggest life regrets is not finishing that second degree, because I wish I just had that extra piece of paper. Not that it really matters now, but I did all the work, and probably as a rather impatient 24-year-old, 23-year-old at that stage, I decided not to stay. So anyway, and I left. And
you'd done a fair amount of time studying
yes,
at that point.
Probably too much time studying.
You must have been pretty interested in it though. You obviously had a business mind and you enjoyed an aspect of it.
Well, I think you'd like to think, and when you're being a parent, which I am now, that your children look at you as an example. So my father was a builder and he worked for Hanson & Youngkin and responsible for some larger building projects that happened at the time in Adelaide.
Can you give me an example of some of those?
The refurbishment of the Adelaide Railway Station, things like that. Again, working for the company, no ownership in the company, but just working in management. And then my mother, at the time when she did accountancy, was I think in her year at university, I think there were 2 other girls and the rest of them were all boys. So I'd always sort of looked up to her. She was working in a family business and I thought, right, well, that's where I want to go. My grandfather was also an accountant, her dad, and he was sort of responsible for the financials of that. And so I thought, well, that's what I want to do. But then I worked out that, no, that's not what I want to do. So
what did you want to do? What was your first job out of uni?
So whilst I was at university and at school, I did a couple of part-time jobs, nothing really good. But the thing that I really enjoyed the most is I actually went and worked. So my grandfather had a couple of farms and I actually went and worked on a lot of them. So I'd sort of drive down there or get taken down there and either live with the manager, or when I got older, not live with the manager when I was on university holidays, sort of 2, 3, 4 weeks at a time, and actually work on the farm.
Where was the farm?
The farm was in Hindmarsh Tiers, so it's on the Fleurieu Peninsula in South Australia. It was about sort of 5,000 acres, which for down there was quite large. Sheep and cattle, no cropping, so got sort of a good exposure to livestock. My uncles and cousins also had farms down the southeast, and I didn't really go and work down there, but I used to visit. But working on those farms really sort of made me think, this is what I really want to do. I actually really enjoy it. And then, of course, even then, farming required quite a bit of capital to get started. So when I actually came home and finished university, I said to my parents, I'd really like to do this. And they said, well, we're not giving you any money to invest in a farm. You have to go and do whatever you want to do and then see where things unfold. And I said, but I really want to do it. And they just said no. I thought, right, okay, no worries. So I am quite a people person. I'm happy to talk. I did have a fair interest in shares and investments. So I walked out of that sort of accountancy degree, went home, looked up all the share broking firms in Adelaide, then basically rang them all up and said, can I come in for an interview? But I ended up getting a job sort of reasonably quickly and was quite happy to work for very little.
Who was that with?
That was with a company called D&D Tolhurst, which is no longer around. That was a Melbourne-based company in Adelaide. Long story short, I worked in the finance industry and share broking. I ended up having customers and dealing with people on the telephone, buying and selling shares and options. Became a licensed options trader, did the options course with the ASX. And I worked in the industry over sort of a 5-year or 6-year period till I was about 29. I finished up working at Macquarie Equities, so working for Macquarie Bank. Went to Sydney a couple of times. It was all quite interesting.
I was going to say when you moved interstate, because I presume the investment banking side of things and share broking was big on the eastern states, but not in
Oh, you're making it sound
Adelaide.
very sexy. I wasn't really working in investment banking. If you're talking about high net worth private individual share broking, I enjoyed it. I learnt a lot. I learnt how to sell, and so that's what it's really about. And again, I hate to sound cynical, and I hate to give the private client share broking thing a bad name, but I was sitting there, I was working in it, and I was working out that we got paid on commission, and you had to share the commission, and the whole idea was to make people buy and sell shares. Was that necessarily the best thing to do for their investment performance? If they have good shares, they shouldn't necessarily sell them. If they had bad shares, they should, and they should buy more good shares. But that longer buy and hold strategy doesn't actually mean that you are turning over the most amount of money and you're not ringing up people with new ideas every day, which is what it's all about. If you watch all the movies, that's what it's all about. So I became, I suppose, somewhat disillusioned and went, what am I actually doing here? I don't want to be doing this when I'm 50. This is not for me. So I thought, well, right, I'm going to walk out. This is not for me. I actually want to be involved in business. I've seen family businesses operate. I've seen where I want to do. I actually be involved in producing something, being involved with employing people, either importing something, creating something, distributing something, whatever. So I walked out of there. I walked in and resigned and said, I'm sorry, I really don't want to do this anymore. And they went, oh, okay.
How old were you at this point?
29.
29. So you'd done how many years?
About 6.
6, yeah. It's good innings.
5 years. Well, not necessarily, because at this stage I think my parents were thinking he never sticks at anything. What's he doing? And then I thought, right, I'm going to buy a business. So I looked around, went to a couple of different business brokers. You never find good businesses with business brokers, but I did hear of one, which was a company called Espresso Coffee Machine Sales and Service. It was run by a lovely guy called Rolf Safke. He had basically started it as a small family business. He was importing raw coffee beans from overseas. He had a very small roasting facility down at Ridlington and had an office in Wright Street. I think he'd done very well out of the business. He had basically had enough. I think he'd had some staff issues and decided that he wanted to try and retire. I looked at the business. I thought it's a manufacturing business, which is very hard to find in South Australia. I think at the time, and I don't want to get my statistics wrong, I think it was roasting about sort of 600 to 700 kilos of coffee a week. So you'd bring in green coffee, stick it in a roaster, lose 20% of its weight, bag it, package it, and then distribute it to your customers who are hopefully buying coffee machines from you and you were providing grinders to, and they would then sort of pay you every week. Fantastic. A good turnover business because people get using it all the time. But more importantly for me, it involved all the things that I thought that I wanted to be involved with, which was importation, production, branding, providing value, and actually going out and providing a tangible service, as opposed to basically sitting on the telephone and convincing people to move pieces of paper around and earning commissions. So that was something that was far more interesting to me.
And was the coffee business or industry huge at that point, or was it the early days?
It wasn't. And again, in industry and in all these things in life, you've got to work hard, you've got to make your own luck, and everyone says that's important, but you also have to be lucky. As 100% about that.
And it's about timing too.
Correct.
Yeah.
And a lot of these things, it's not when you sell, it's when you buy and what you choose to do. So I was fortunate that I'd found a willing vendor who was very helpful to me and a very nice fellow. I then basically set about saying, right, I'm going to really make this a goer. I'm going to show people what we can actually try and do.
Can you tell me how much you bought that business for?
Paid about $900,000, stock including plant. So again, as I mentioned, we did have some family money, so I was fortunate enough. My parents helped me buy my first house, and I actually didn't have a mortgage on that. And then I went into the bank and I mortgaged the whole thing. And then I borrowed some extra money for the bank, gave the bank my house as collateral, and went all in. Which at the time, my parents were also going, oh, I'm not allowed to swear on this, but like, what are you doing?
You must have been pretty confident.
Well, again, you've got to make these things work and you've got to have a go. So
and you've got to take risks, don't you?
You've got to take risks. And I think a bit of debt also motivates you. And, you know, we can talk about interest rates and all the rest of it in the time I've been in business in a falling interest rate cycle, which has also been very fortunate. But you do have to have some debt to motivate you and make it all work, and obviously try and amplify the returns of what you're doing from your small initial investment. So one thing led to another. I inherited a small amount of staff. We hired some more staff. I decided to rebrand the business, call it Monjava Coffee, which I thought was a lot better than espresso machine sales and service.
Why Monjava?
My is French for me. Java is slang for coffee, so my coffee. Come up with a really trendy, bright orange colour, make it stand out because it used to be just blue and green, and seek to market and brand the product. And then use the relationships that we had in that we were selling to some small snack bars and all that sort of stuff, and we were competing against Lavazza at the time, Piazza Dorio, Vittoria, Illy, all these massive either national or international brands, and it was really hard. It was quite a tight industry, and what a lot of people don't realise is all those umbrellas and coffee machines and everything else that you see in all these cafes, those cafes don't pay for that. They're provided that by the coffee company in an effort to convince them to buy the coffee. Then it's unrealistic. So you can either go and buy the coffee at $16 a kilo at the time, or these larger companies used to sign people up to 3 and 5 year contracts and say, we'll give you all these umbrellas, cups, saucers, coffee machine, grinder. You have to buy a coffee for 5 years and you have to pay $30 a kilo for it. So a lot of all these large cafes are all contracted around that. So I worked out very quickly that there's 2, 3, 4, 5 ways to play the game. I just thought it would be easy. We'll roast coffee and sell it. So we had to go and enter into all those types of contracts and try and compete with all those larger companies. Then I also thought, right, how do we grow the business? So we went into the whole wholesale thing. So there are 3 large independent supermarket groups in South Australia, Chapleys, Romeo's and Drake's. Went and saw them. They were very happy to try and stock a South Australian product because at the time there wasn't many people roasting coffee in South Australia. I should probably also add, so then you have to have a competitive advantage in what you do. So we were the first people to bring a profile roaster into South Australia. I brought one of these on out of America.
What's a profile roaster?
Okay, so very, very quickly.
I don't even own a coffee machine, so I'm very...
No, that's all right.
So
just very quickly, if you think about it, raw coffee's green and hard, and you stick it in a coffee roaster, which is basic, with very, very simple terms. It's a rotating drum sitting over a flame, either induction or convection heat. You put the raw coffee in, it cracks twice. I won't go into all that when it's sitting in the roaster, and then it comes out and it looks like the cooked coffee bean that you see. So it becomes a green thing to a cooked thing. There are many different paths or journeys to actually get that green coffee to that cooked stage to make it look like on the outside. So you can do it for 5 minutes, 15 minutes, half an hour. So what would happen with an old style coffee roaster is the first roast we'd do for the day, we'd have them all loaded up. We'd have an old Petrocini roaster sitting there, which is what I inherited. We'd put the coffee in the first roast, we'd go in that colour, and you'd only be pulling it on colour at that stage when you actually put it out in the tray to cool it. Might take half an hour to actually get it from that green colour to that cooked colour. The last roast of the day would take 12 minutes. So I equate it, if you take a frozen pie out of the oven, you can either make it look the same on the outside by cooking it really fast and then it's still frozen on the inside, or you can take the frozen pie out of the oven and cook it over a lower heat for a longer duration and still make it look the same on the outside, but then taste a lot better on the inside. So the whole idea of a profile coffee roaster, which is controlled by telemetry and sensors within it, is whether it's the first roast of the day or the last roast of the day, you take the coffee on the same journey over a time frame and temperature. So therefore, you can actually make the coffee taste the same, because basically a lot of the problems in the industry at the time were you'd have some really good roast, which would taste really good, and you weren't able to map the journey because it was all very old school. And then you'd have to go, well, the coffee looks exactly the same, but it tastes completely different because it went on a completely different journey to achieve that cooking process. So that became pretty obvious to me up front that this is the reason we had a lot of variability. So again, did a lot of research on what to get, what not to get, how coffee roasters did and didn't work. Set it on a company out of the States, and we were the first person to bring a profile roaster to South Australia. And that really set us out, and my first taste of asset financing at the time, because I didn't have the money to buy one. So I went along to ANZ, so right, this is going to be a game changer. If I give you the roaster as collateral, can I take out a 5-year contract? Because at the time, the roaster was worth about $300,000, and that was like a third of what I paid for the entire business.
Wow.
But with the new brand, and so that was sort of a marketing edge, though. I was then able to go to these cafes and go to these sort of Drake's, Romeo's and Chapleys and say, if you're willing to stock our South Australian coffee, I can guarantee it's going to be of this quality, and this is the reason why. Come, I moved the factory. We moved to a factory at Kent Town. Come, have a look. And it was a really good sort of show and tell thing to give people, again, because you have to have a differential.
It seems like you had a lot more control over the process.
Correct.
As well.
And it's all about quality. Yeah. Provide the same experience.
Yep.
And that actually, I'd have to say, if I look back at that business, that was the one thing that was pivotal in actually making it work. Anyway, really glad I did that. Big risk at the time. Then managed to get that range, and then we were starting to actually get into some better cafes and actually starting to do some of the better strips on King William Road and the Parade and sort of rebranding the rest of the business that we'd acquired. But we were seeing quite a lot of growth coming out of this wholesale side because obviously a lot better. The one thing I didn't like about the coffee industry is we were stuck to hospitality. Mm-hmm. So again, as the business owner, we weren't very big. You would have large customers ring up on Sunday morning or Saturday afternoon saying, one, I'm out of coffee, or two, my coffee machine doesn't work. But that's the other thing we used to do, part of the business which we inherited, which was more probably the person's that I bought the business from, expertise, which was bringing in machines and actually sort of being a bit of a technician and fixing them. Quite a practical person. My father was quite a practical person. I've always enjoyed tools and making stuff and all that sort of thing. So I actually really enjoyed the whole part of bringing in the machines and actually being able to fix them ourselves, set the grinders, do all that sort of stuff, from changing thermostats.
And you kept that going all the way through.
We kept all that going, but I suppose the point I'm getting to is one of the things I really hated, or disliked, I should say, was Saturday afternoon, Sunday morning, you'd have a very good customer ring up and say, oh, look, my coffee machine's not working, you need to come and fix it. And I'd be like out doing something else, but you had to just drop everything and go and do it. I wasn't at that time paying employees to work on the weekend, or I've run out of coffee and I'm about to have my busiest morning on Sunday morning, which a lot of these businesses did. I need 20 kilos delivered and I need it delivered by 7:30 on Sunday morning. And you either did it or you lost the customer. So that was quite painful. However, you needed that to push the brand. What the nice thing about selling to the supermarkets was you didn't get any of that. You did all these box deals and all the rest of it. You got it delivered. You either delivered it yourself or you had the guys deliver it. And it was all very nice. Slightly less margin, but a lot less hassle. And for that reason, I thought, right, if I'm really going to grow this business and either sell it or move on, because at the end of the day, I still was harbouring, I just really want to, agriculture is what I'd really like to do. Thought, right, we're going to have to try and get this thing either ranged in Woolworths or Coles. It's the only way someone's going to take it seriously. The only way to do that was the Woolworths buying. So I'd sort of found out Coles was a bit hard to deal with. The Woolworths buying centre and where all the people that made all the decisions were based out of Sydney. So started sending over product, worked out who the coffee buyer was over there, then started going over and trying to get the product range there. And there's this massive buyer distribution centre. I can't remember the name of the suburb in Sydney, and you'd sit there and you'd be sitting in the front reception, and the reception was absolutely huge, and there were all these people sitting there and they were trying to get towels ranged, different food range, they were importing sardines, and you could see everyone sitting there with a little box of thinking that getting everything ranged in Woolworths was this absolute panacea. Anyway, it was quite interesting. And a lot of people, you could see the particular people in charge of the different categories, they didn't take the people seriously. They'd walk out and they'd make the person present in the front office or like in the front reception area in front of everyone else, because they thought, oh, these people, they're not going to be able to do it and they're not going to be able to arrange it. And if you got taken more seriously, you got taken into a meeting room and you actually got a chance to sit down and have a bit of a presentation and show the product. Luckily, I was an Australian manufacturing company. There aren't very many of us, and a lot of the coffee that Woolworths was selling at the time was all imported. There weren't very many Australian producers, and that was one of my angles. And that's obviously one of their angles as well. They want to try and support Australian industry. So I managed to get my foot in the door with that one, made them some coffee, showed them the product, gave them the story, talk about the profile roaster thing, all the rest of it. At the time, there were some other people bringing in profile roasters as well in New South Wales and Victoria. Managed to get to the point after about 6 journeys of going back and forth talking to this one fella and seeing him, and then they came back with a whole lot and then you learn all about barcodes and SKUs and packaging, and basically they want all their product to take up the smallest amount of shelf space, and it all has to be boxed so they can take it out and leave it in the box and stack it there, and it all has to be square because we had the wrong packaging, we had all the wrong stuff on the boxes and all that stuff. So I had to go back and jump through all these hoops, and that involves, different carton contracts and making sure you had barcodes and everything, and then you have to register the SKUs with an organisation so it's able to sit in their back office and do all that sort of stuff. So that was actually a really interesting learning process. Whenever I walk into a supermarket now, I understand what everyone's gone through to get the right packaging just so their product's there.
Did you get to a point where you thought this is all too hard?
I did, but it's all about the end game. So the last time I went there to get it ranged, they said, yep, we'll do it. We did so many hundreds of kilos in each DC and we'll range it in a select amount of stores and see how it goes. Oh, this was just amazing. I flew back on the plane from Sydney going, oh, this is absolutely awesome. Arrived back at my office, went home, came into work the next day, got a phone call, and I'm not kidding you, within less than 24 hours for the guy who runs San Remo Pasta. A fellow called Pasquale Ferraro, worked for the Crotty family, had been working for them his entire life, was the CEO. He said, I'd like to come in and talk to you about your coffee company. And I said, oh, what do you want to talk about? And he said, just call me Paz. And he said, I won't beat around the bush. We'd be interested in buying it. We've been looking at getting into coffee roasting. We like what you're doing in South Australia. And I'd like to come around and have a chat. I said, it's not really for sale. But anyway, feel free to come around and have a chat. I've since put two and two together and worked out how this works. But anyway, so they came around and had a chat. And old Mr. Crotty came around with him, Aldo. This was before he died. Rolled up in two black BMWs, all wearing black, very Italian. I have to say, also really good people to deal with. Great family business, huge South Australian success story. And we had grown the business to that point where we were roasting about 3.5 tonnes of coffee a week. And I was just about to start roasting a whole lot more to meet some of this Woolworths cost track. Was thinking about buying another profile roaster.
So in comparison, what were you doing when you first took over the business?
About 700 kilos.
Wow.
So we'd grown a lot of volume. Again, also very lucky, fortunate to get into that industry when the whole coffee culture was starting to take off. Smoking was on the decline, very addictive product. People buy it every day, lots of turnover. I look at it now, there was a whole lot of things as to why it was a good business. I wasn't necessarily aware of all those things at the time, but I've since sort of worked out. And again, it's all about timing. I sold in 2007, and that's just before large crash on the share market here, and again, very fortunate with the timing. So they walked in, were basically prepared to pay 5 times earnings for the company, adjusted, which meant I was able to sell the thing for about sort of nearly $4 million after paying $900,000 for it and owning it for about 4.5 years.
Was it only 4.5 years?
Yes.
You did all that in 4.5 years?
Yes, so we're very busy. And I thought, oh, gee. And again, so this is, the stuff you actually dream about, right? I'm going to buy a company, I'm going to build it, and I'm going to be able to sell it, and everyone, sort of reminds themselves in their our age group, Kerry Packer was this big business icon and he was always buying stuff cheap and selling it expensive. And I thought, shit, this is just amazing. I've actually managed to accomplish this. This is wonderful. Fair bit of tax to pay and a few other things to do, but I was able to...
But you're only in your mid-30s by this
Yes,
stage.
I was actually in my early 30s.
Early 30s.
Yeah. So a fair bit of tax to pay and all that stuff to do. And I had to actually work for them for a year. And again, one of the best experiences I had was then working for San Remo Pasta. They actually then went and bought 2 other South Australian smaller coffee roasting companies, and I was put in charge of actually running their whole coffee division, setting up their new factory at Windsor Gardens. I bought in 2 really large profile roasters with obviously their money, which was even more fun. Set up a new factory, bought the 3 businesses into one and moved it all to Windsor Gardens. And I have to say the Crotty family were very generous, very nice, very good to work for, very good people. And I wanted to make sure I left it in the best possible position, which we did. We amalgamated, we had it all running, and I worked for them for 12 months. Their whole thing of what they do with pasta is just absolutely amazing. It is just such a fantastic South Australian success story, and particularly Morris and David, but particularly Morris, fantastic marketer, very good businessman.
So how's Monjava now?
They're still running it. I don't follow it as closely. They have got it ranged in Coles and Woolworths, and they have got it ranged in the independents. I'm not quite sure that they're still pushing it as hard as what they were, but anyway, that's what they decided to do. San Remo, Balducci and Zaffarelli, 3 pasta brands that all Australians would know. What a lot of Australians don't know is San Remo, Balducci and Zaffarelli, which are the 3 big things in all the Coles, in the 500 Coles and Woolworths all around Australia. They're all made by San Remo. They have 3 different brands at 3 different price points. So they basically control the pasta segment in Coles and Woolworths and all the independents in all of Australia. It is an absolutely massive business. They set up their flour mill to actually, because obviously they were the ones who drove people to grow durum wheat in South Australia. Aldo first started that because you needed durum wheat to make the pasta so it didn't fall apart when you boiled it. Then got sick of buying flour, started their own flour mill at Windsor Gardens, a byproduct of the flour mill, which after they'd ground the wheat, they didn't know what to do with, so they started making noodles and rice crackers. So you would also have heard of Fantastic Noodles and Fantastic Rice Crackers. That's also them. And again, used their massive relationship with Woolworths and Coles to get it all ranged through all of there. So fantastic company, a lot of respect for them.
Very
when you
clever.
go into their factory, it's absolutely state of art. And they are a massive, understated South Australian company. They never appear in any of the rich list stuff. They have all their figures taken out of turnover, or they would easily be South Australia's richest or second richest family and successful business Australia-wide, but refuse to have any press about it. A great unknown.
You work for them for a year.
Work for them.
So then what was the next
Well, then
step
I thought
for you?
I don't want to continue working for them.
Yeah.
I want to go back and start my own company. Was looking around at trying to buy farms. Couldn't really make that work. Obviously, way too young to retire. Wanted to do some other stuff. When I was running Monjava Coffee, we sort of found it harder and harder to have our own vans delivering everything as the business grew. So we actually used APD parcel delivery to actually deliver a lot of our stuff to the local South Australian customers. I knew the company. I knew the owner. I knew he wanted to retire. I knew he had a son about my age who he didn't believe was going to be involved in the next stage of the business for succession planning. So I rang him up and I said, look, I've just sold my company. I've got this money. I'm just about to finish working here. Would you be interested in selling your company? Yes, he would. Again, extraordinarily lucky with the timing. So I could walk into what was APD Parcel Delivery, which is South Australia's largest independently owned private courier, the largest hub and spoke distribution system operating in South Australia with next day parcel delivery, doing freight forwarding interstate and doing normal direct courier as well. And because at that stage of the cycle, we were sort of 2009 odd, you weren't able to demand that high multiple because the whole world economy had changed. So life is a game of multiples and business is a game of multiples and timings. I was able to buy that for 3 times earnings. So basically the company was making about $1 million a year and I was able to buy it for $3 million.
Wow.
Yeah. And this company was
Because of the state of the economy.
because of the state of the economy, whereas if he'd sold that 2 years ago, he might have got 5, 6, 7 times earnings. So again, I was very fortunate in how that worked.
Just going back a bit, you approached coffee, but you obviously didn't have a lot of coffee knowledge.
No,
and
none.
you learned on the run.
Bought a lot of books, read about it, did all the rest of it.
So you just read a lot of books. Same with
Logistics,
touring.
absolutely.
Yep.
And
Yep.
again, running a business is about running a team, and you learn this getting older. You've got to have the right people, and you've got to be able to talk to people. If you want people to respect you, you've got to treat them with respect. So it's all about trying to get the right people. And again, it's really not that hard, in my opinion, to run a business. You answer the call. You're nice to everyone. If you say you're going to do something, you do it. If you can't do something, you tell them up front and you don't do it. You try and offer good service. You try and treat them as if they were you. And then you actually try and sort of think, well, what are we good at? What are we bad at? Let's do more of the stuff that we're good at and less of the stuff that we're bad at. I know that's a very simplified view. And the other big thing is solvency. If you're looking like you're going to go down a path where you've got more money going out than coming in, don't stop, turn around, find another way, because you have to have more money coming in than going out. Otherwise, you're going to go broke and your business is going to be worth nothing. I know that sounds very simple, but it is essential.
Did you have a mentor or someone you relied on in those early days with coffee? Or did you just do it on your own?
No, I actually, looking back on it, I didn't really. I just sort of went and did it on my own. Again, fortunate to have to start, fortunate to have a house that my parents basically helped me pay for, that I could use as collateral, and knew that probably I wasn't going to be on the absolute bones of my ass if I blew it all up, but did risk it and did go for it and just wanted to keep going to try and prove everyone that, yes, I can do this and this is what I want to do.
Okay, going back to the
logistics
APD.
business.
Yep. So what happened after that? What did you do in that period of time?
I ran that basically as a managing director for a year. We employed about 25 people directly and then about another 80 people as full-time contractors. And that's just the logistics model of how things work. Good business, good cash flow, little bit boring, great investment, very happy with it. And then I thought...
Little bit boring.
Well, because I'd able to actually buy the company and didn't have a lot of debt associated with it. It was clugging out a bit of money, and I thought this is going to be the opportunity where I actually can go and do what I want to do. And so this is where I sort of struck upon the next business model that I've used sort of successfully since, whereas, right, I need to find someone to run this for me and actually continue to pay me an income stream and a dividend stream so I can actually go and do what I want to do, which is farming. Because at that time I'd also met my wife, Sophie, who was a girl from the mid-north, and she sort of shared my dream of actually living on a farm, working on a farm, going back to doing what I'd done when I was at university and school. And I thought, right, we're going to get serious about this. The only way I'm going to do it is I have to push myself. Let's go and sort of make the bold move. So I thought, right, I'm going to have to go and find someone who's willing to buy a stake in this company and actually work in it, and therefore is fully invested in wanting to do it and actually run it for me while I go and do what I want to go and do. I actually knew of someone, sort of a colleague who, Luke Shearer, who's now my business partner and has been my business partner down there for the last 12 years. 13 years.
How do you know him?
So I went to school with him, but he was also running Crown Forklifts in South. He was a commercial manager at Crown Forklifts in South Australia. We were buying from, in both coffee and APD, I was buying forklifts from him, and he came and looked at it, did his due diligence, and off he went, and still doing it today.
And how's that business going?
It's going well. We've had some ups and downs as you do in logistics. We have changed the business model slightly, grown the hub and spoke side of it, grown the freight forwarding side of it, dialed down the direct courier side of it. But more importantly, we were able to buy the building that the business operated from in our super fund. And then we decided that the only way we're going to grow the business is if we had B-double access, because the business was originally based in Theberton. So we moved out to Dunley Park. Okay. So the best thing we ever did was invest in real estate ourselves, which is the whole point of it, really, because that's where all the wealth is. So we sold the thing in Theberton and we bought the place at Dudley Park, which is like 15,000 square metres, 5,000 square metres under one roof. And we were able to move the business into there because we had the facilities and now the extra ability to take on larger trucks and do break bulk for interstate and all the rest of it. That meant the business was able to grow. And then we've started a whole warehousing business where now we've got about 2/3 of that business full of pallets where people are charging us, where we're charging people recurring income.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. Which again, recurring income, another major thing that I try and sort of do in business, people that pay you every month no matter what happens. So you're basically renting out pallet space. So that's sort of where we have been for the last 5 years down there. And I sort of go down there once every couple of weeks. I'm involved with strategy and management, but Luke is 100% responsible for what goes on, staff, figures, all the rest of it, and sort of him and I are the two directors of the company. At that stage, my son Rupert had just been born. He was one. With my brother-in-law, we decided to train to run a marathon. We went over to New York. The only reason I say I remember doing that is because basically when I walked out to go and run the marathon, I'd sort of handed over the business to Luke, and basically from then on, Luke was running it. So went over, did that, had a couple of weeks holiday with the family. It was before my daughter was born. Came back and said, right, done these two business things. Now it's actually time to actually do what we want to do. So I went looking for a farm.
And he did. And you're going to hear all about that in the next episode. George will divulge his early days working at Kapiti, the acquisition of Collinsville and dealings with the Hanbury family, and then the further acquisitions across the Mid-North. So you're only halfway through. George has squeezed in a lot in his 48 years. So stay tuned for the next instalment coming out next week. For new listeners to the Voice It podcast, a little bit about me. My name is Annabelle Homer. I am a former ABC rural broadcaster, but I now run a small communications business as a voice coach and podcaster and MC. I host and produce podcasts for organisations, I MC events, I run public speaking workshops, and I record family memoirs. Get in touch if any of those services appeal to you. Catch you next week.